Welcome, everybody.
Go
My name
ahead.
is Velma Morgan. I'm the chair of Operation Black Vote Canada. Before we start this event that's hosted by Operation Black Vote Canada and the BBPA, I understand that we are across Canada today, and I would like to acknowledge that the land I am standing on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credits, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is now too home to many diverse First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people. I also acknowledge that Treaty 13, the Mississaugas of the Credits, covers Toronto. I also acknowledge all treaty peoples, those who came here as settlers, as migrants, either in this generation or generation past, and those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly forcible displaced Africans brought here as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. Today, I pay tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent. So, Minister Hussein has been extremely busy um, doing a lot of roundtables and dialogues about the post budget. And I've been on calls with him where there are 300 people, 400 people. And we wanted to do a smaller, more intimate type of event with stakeholders of the BBPA and stakeholders of Operation Black Vote so we can get a good dialogue with some questions answered by the minister. So this is why we decided to have yet another post-budget roundtable. So thank you everybody for being here. Thank you, Minister, for taking time out of your extremely busy schedule normally, but right now even more busy because of the budget. So I'm going to pass it on to Nadine.
Hi, thank you so much, Velma. Welcome, everyone. I'm Nadine Spencer, the president of the Black Business and Professional Association. I am very thrilled to welcome the minister to have this dialogue with us tonight. And Minister, I know that, as Velma says, you've been very busy with many different groups, but we wanted to have, this intimate conversation with 80 people at the BBPA because, the finances is very important to our community. As you can imagine, with the Black Entrepreneurship Program, there's been many steps. Our stakeholders and members have a lot of questions, and we want to know more. And so I thank you very much for being here. And without further ado, I will introduce the minister, the Honorable Ahmed Hussen, Minister of Families and Children and Social Development for York South-Weston. Minister Hussen, you've always been a true friend to the BBPA. We see you at so many different events where you're championing and supporting the work that we do. So I thank you for being here and welcome.
Thank you so much, Nadine. And I must say that when Nadine and Velma ask you to come to an event, you better show up. So I want to thank you for your leadership, your sacrifice, your relentless drive to improve our community together. And I'm so honored to join you once again. Ladies and gentlemen, this was a historic budget, historic in the sense that it is a budget that is tackling a once in a generation event, which is the pandemic, which has decimated so many sectors of our society and community. Having said that, some people have done very well, and some sectors are doing very well in this economy. But the budget really had two main goals. One is to continue to support Canadians through the pandemic, and recognizing that we're still in the pandemic, and also recognizing that we're getting vaccinated, more vaccines are arriving daily and weekly. And so we also, the budget's second goal is to invest in having a strong economic recovery, but an inclusive economic recovery so that no one is left behind. That's why you saw, for example, historic investments in early learning and childcare, historic investments for Black Canadians, setting up a $200 million endowment fund for Black Canadian charities and nonprofits. That's legacy setting. That fund will outlast our government. It will outlast many of us on this call. $100 million in 1 year for Black Canadian Communities Initiative in terms of capacity and capital. Let me just put that into perspective. That fund was 25 million over 5 years. Now, I was able to obtain 100 million just for this year. That will allow me to go back to all the proponents, all the amazing projects we could not fund in the last round, to now fund many more projects right across the country from coast to coast to coast for Black Canadian community capacity building and infrastructure and capital. There's so much in the budget that I don't think half an hour is enough, and I'm sure we will continue these discussions. But incredible investments again in housing, in infrastructure, in business supports, more money for the Black Entrepreneurship Program, more money to tackle systemic racism, anti-Black racism in the RCMP, more money, $172 million to Statistics Canada to provide disaggregated data by race so that we can address the gaps. If you can't measure it, you can't track it. If you can't track it, you can't make progress. Money set aside to allow young people and adults to obtain pardons in a less expensive, faster process. $88 million. And we know that that is something that a lot of members of our community were asking for, because pardons were made harder and more expensive to obtain by the last government, and we're fixing that systemic barrier. Huge promise to invest not just in the reform of the criminal justice system traditionally, but actually the organizations that are doing amazing work to divert young people and adults away from the system. And many other investments in youth, $5.7 billion investment to allow youth to pursue an education, to continue the education, to get jobs, 215,000 jobs for young people and so on. So I want to stop there. There's just so much in this budget. It's an incredible budget for Black Canadians. It's an incredible budget for all Canadians. And I just want to end by saying one thing. On the programs that I am responsible for, including, for example, the $400 million as part of the new Community Service Recovery Fund, just like I did with the Emergency Community Support Fund. I will make sure that I apply a Black Canadian lens to make sure that both the receiving organizations of the money and the receiving populations of the services are also reflected in the diversity of Canada, which includes Black Canadians. So rest assured, whether it is the National Housing Strategy, whether it's the Rapid Housing Initiative, where we got an additional $1.5 billion, all of those initiatives, I will be applying a Black Canadian lens, as I did last time with the Emergency Community Support Fund. That's why I know, for example, out of the $350 million, 5.6% of that money went to Black Canadians. Well, how do I know that? Because I had a plan and I stuck to that plan, and I made sure that no dollar went out until I was satisfied that it was going to be distributed in an equitable and fair manner. So I'll turn it back to you, Velma and Nadine, to really take it from here. Happy to answer any questions. And know one thing, all the meetings that we had together, all the pushing and the perspectives that you shared with me are directly reflected in the budget. You know, don't think that I got that $100 million or that $200 million for the endowment or the extra money for the procurement for Black entrepreneurs with the Government of Canada through Public Services and Procurement Canada. There's additional money there, $87 million to, among other things, facilitate Black entrepreneurs to get government contracts through procurement. All of those things happen because we work together, and I listened to you and I was open, and I'll continue to do that. So back to you, Velma and Nadine.
Oh, Velma is talking away. Okay.
We're going to throw it over to Michael, who's going to moderate some questions. So if you do have any, go ahead, Michael.
Thank you very much, Velma. I know you're so, we're very happy right now, and therefore we are very emotional folks, and we have a lot of stuff to see. So my name is Michael Pinnock, and I'm the treasurer of the BBPA, and I'd like to join in with the rest of the members and say it's an honor, Honorable Minister, to be here. I've been on one of your webinars where you're actually teaching and lecturing, and that is good. And you did mention back then that you're coming back to the community for us to advise you how to actually get it from the 40,000 feet down to landing so that it really get to the folks that it was designed to reach. and to make those impacts. So I've got a couple of questions for myself, but I will defer to the group because we got a few questions prior to the session. And I'll ask Anton or whoever's going to read those questions. Let's go through those first. And then just before the end, I'll sort of put in my 2 cents question. Okay, so it's going to be who we're going to ask the questions. And those who have new questions, either put it in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll try to moderate it in that manner.
Okay.
So we'll take the first question, whoever's got the first question. Is it you, Anton?
Anton, Kathy McDonald has a question. Can you please unmute Kathy so she can ask that question? Thank you.
And can I recommend something here? We actually mute folks so that we minimize the background noise. But we ought to be very disciplined so that, you know, we save time by trying to unmute each time. So if people believe they're disciplined enough to have it unmute, we'll go that route. But the background noise is what we're trying to get out of while we mute folks. So go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for being here, Minister Hussein. So my question is that I would argue that the pandemic of racism was here before COVID, and it continues to be here, and it will be here after we do conquer COVID. So I just was wondering, what plan does the federal government have to actively engage in eradicating anti-Black racism in education? And I understand that education is actually a provincial mandate, but I think it's important that on a federal level, that federally, that issue is tackled.
Well, how would you suggest we do that? Because we have a constitution and we just can't interfere in provincial education. So how would you, can you give me an idea on how we would go about that? And I'm happy to take it up.
Yeah, sure. Because when we're transferring funds, because we provinces get money to deal with education. And if the federal government could envelope funds that is to deal specifically with anti-Black racism in the educational system, because I can tell you I'm a school board trustee, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with what's going on in Peel with the Peel District School Board, but I can tell you I am fielding calls as far as Ottawa, Hamilton, York, and you know, so Peel may be in the spotlight, but it's not unique to Peel. And I look, I'm hearing from people when you go to on the national level of school boards, it's happening in Calgary, in Saskatchewan. We had a 13-year-old commit suicide from bullying at school right? So it's a national crisis. And I think it should be dealt with on a national level. So if enveloping funds for the ministers of education to deal specifically with anti-Black racism and naming it, because I find often if you just say general racism or discrimination, you know, Black people, we get to the bottom in terms of importance. And I think it's really important to own it and name it and dedicate funds specifically for anti-Black racism.
I couldn't agree more, but I would say, first of all, I couldn't agree more with you, and happy to take that on. It would help if also the community wrote to the government demanding that, and I think that would be something that I can point to and say, look, the community is asking for it. The second point that I also want to inject a little bit of not discouragement, but just know who we're up against. When the George Floyd matter happened and then Canadians took to the streets to demand justice, the Prime Minister convened a First Minister's meeting, and he wanted them to put out a statement committing to ending anti-Black racism and systemic discrimination. And a number of premiers refused to sign. And he had to threaten to release the statement without them. And that's when they joined. So we're talking, I mean, you remember at that time, both Doug Ford and the Premier of Quebec both refused to even acknowledge the reality of systemic racism in Canada. They said, this is something that happens in the United States. So we're not, you know, we have our work cut out for us. I'm saying I'm happy to take that on and as part of the Canada Social and Health Transfer, but it's not going to be easy, because they'll also scream that this is provincial jurisdiction and you shouldn't tell us what to do.
Thank you, Minister, and thanks for that first question. You mentioned as part of the budget this year that I think $172 million will be going to Statistics Canada.
Yeah.
Just with segregating the information.
Yeah, the disaggregated data, which is something that the community has been asking for a long time.
And that is absolutely necessary, because what has happened over the centuries, and you mentioned it earlier, if it's not measured,
yes,
it's not managed. And one of the reasons why these things are not measured, one of the reasons why they're thrown into this big aggregate, is because nobody wants to first identify that they exist. So they have to manage them. And so I think that will go a far way in, one thing I'd see is, let's ensure that this disaggregated information does not become private, because that's another challenge.
I can guarantee that. I can guarantee that. And let me, by the way, the 172 million is, we're doubling down on something that we've already been doing. So since, I believe, 2019, we have been disaggregating data, and again, in response to the community. So, and the proof is in July 2020, the jobs report that came out was the first jobs report in Canadian history that disaggregated based on race. That's why we knew, for example, that the unemployment rate was 9% for everyone, but for Black Canadians, it was 16%. The only reason I know that is because StatsCan started to disaggregate the data, right? And then they did it again in December. But prior to that, we only had one number, and Black Canadians were hidden in the unemployment figures. So this 172 will do more of that in other segments like health outcomes, home ownership, mental health, all the other pieces that are extremely important. And you mentioned something, I think Kathy mentioned the idea of calling it anti-Black racism, and also in more positive ways when we're talking about different groups saying Black Canadians, because I think one of the things I encountered as a minister when I took over, I'm also the minister responsible for the National Housing Strategy. The National Housing Strategy used to say racialized Canadians. And I insisted on making sure that Black Canadians were distinctly named, and that makes a difference in terms of the policy outcomes.
Yeah, and the second part of what Kathy mentioned, even though the Constitution and practice may indicate or suggest that the feds stay out of the province, a tone at the top always trickle down, whether it's positive or negative. So if a tone is set at the top that, listen, information should be deaggregated, things should be called out in specific terms so they can be managed, people will follow suit. So I think those are two areas that would definitely lead to a positive outcome. We can take the next question for the minister.
I have a question here from Monique Morgan. Is there any compensation for businesses that have been directly affected by the infrastructure forcing many to close down even before the pandemic?
There is monies available through the different support systems that we've put in place for all businesses that have been impacted by COVID. There is, the budget is extending the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy. We are extending the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. We're extending the Canada Emergency Business Account. And we are doing a number of other things to support businesses in certain sectors. It's a huge budget with a lot of different pieces for business, but those are the top three that I can mention to you.
And just piggybacking on that question, I know that in our community, one of the challenges we have is, our tax returns and books and records and stuff like that have a challenge and so forth. A lot of the folks had difficulty qualifying for some of those stuff. Is there any amelioration, any changes in the extended version that will allow some of those folks who weren't qualified in the first round to be able to access this extended version, given the state of their books and records and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think Minister Mary Ng, who's the minister responsible for small business, she has heard this from the community, and I've spoken to her about some of the challenges for Black Canadian entrepreneurs to access those supports. And so I completely agree with you. As we extend these supports, we also have to take stock on those who were left behind the first time and make the necessary changes. And this is part of the challenge that we're facing, is that even when on the political side, we show ambition and we move forward, the government machinery takes time to adapt to the community, because traditionally, this is not a community that the machinery of government is used to dealing with. And we saw that with some of the different programs. But we are making those changes, and we need your continued feedback constantly to make sure that the civil servants are getting that feedback, so that their efforts are matching our ambition on the political side.
And I can tell you, Honorable Minister, that the Black community right now, Operations Vote and BBP, two of the main operations here, that we have structured and restructured our organization to facilitate that transition. So where the community had difficulty going directly, we have created conduits that will make it easier for them once they pass through our process to access these.
That's incredible. And the Black Entrepreneurship Program, I think, will also serve, first of all, the program will help a lot of Black entrepreneurs, but it will also show the private sector what they have been missing in terms of the not giving capital to Black entrepreneurs, and how they have been short-sighted in terms of looking at the kinds of entrepreneurs that will succeed through the Black Entrepreneurship Fund. And I think that will be a good living example to the private sector to smarten up and be less stingy when it comes to Black entrepreneurs.
Right. And you may find that some of the other questions we're going to ask is sort of pivot in that respect. How do we get, as I say, the 40,000 feet down to the landing plot where we really need it? And so you'll hear some questions later about how can we guarantee that the funds get to those people that it was designed for. So we'll take the other questions that is there.
With that said, let's pivot to this one. How will the government ensure that the right people or group will be administering the $200 million fund?
I was asked that question yesterday. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. There are many small neighborhood organizations that primarily focus on families that are Black. This isn't specifically named in their mandate or constitution. Mm-hmm. How will they be able to apply for the funding?
Okay, so number one, on the $200 million fund, the way we will disperse it is the same way that we started it in the beginning, which was listening to the community. The reason why we set up the Black Endowment Fund is because the community asked for it, and they advocated for it, and they made a very compelling, strong case why the Black Canadian community needs an endowment fund that will last for generations, and that will be a constant source of money to fund Black Canadian charities and nonprofits. Now, so we've done it now. We've allocated the money in the budget. Who's going to manage it and how it'll be dispersed will be something that will be co-developed with the community. I don't want to make that decision. I don't want to design it. I want to do it together with the community. And that's the way to do it, and there's two reasons for that. One is by co-developing it with the community, you build further capacity. And second, it's a question of respect. Why should bureaucrats in Ottawa design an endowment fund for the Black community? It's not going to work as well as when it's designed by and for Black Canadians, right? So the answer is, we heard you in terms of setting it up. We heard you in terms of allocating $200 million. Now the next step, again, will be done with the community. In terms of either the endowment fund or the Supporting Black Canadians Communities Initiative, which has just gotten an additional $100 million, on both of those, unless you feel differently, my personal opinion is that it should only go to Black-led and Black-serving organizations. I'm not interested in using dedicated money for Black Canadians to invest to build capacity for non-Black Canadian organizations. I don't think that's fair. Those organizations can access other supports that are available in the government, including the $400 million that we will put into this community support, community services recovery fund. There is money under CEBA. There's money under the multiculturalism program and the heritage ministry. So there's a lot of money. I don't think non-Black Canadian organizations should then come and squeeze out Black Canadian organizations and tap into money that is dedicated for Black Canadians. But again, I'm open to change if that's what the community wants. But I suspect that's not what the community wants.
And as a tone at the stop, Honorable Minister, we could also, just like we're de-aggregating different information, we could provide that information to the overall community, because some folks don't believe that currently other racial groups, other organizations are properly funded. They're saying, well, what's so special about us? We have been left behind for such a long time, and that's what makes us special. But by showing them that here is 200 million, you guys have been getting 200 billion over a number of years. And so this 200 million is actually for the Black community, because we have actually had an experience in that already, where we started to do a distribution, we were questioned, but we're all here suffering together. Why only the Black section will be getting this funding? So if we could be provided with that sort of background information as some sort of tool that we can use to explain.
Fair enough, but it's not just the money that people are receiving, it's also the need. If you look at StatScan, the second to Indigenous peoples, Black Canadians have the highest amounts of poverty, the lowest median household income, the lowest rates of home ownership, and so on and so on and so on. And why do I know that? The only reason I know that is because Statistics Canada has started to collect disaggregated data by race. That's the only reason we know that. So now that we know those needs, we are responding with dedicated money.
And guess what, Honorable Minister? We in the Black community knew that.
Yeah, we all knew that, but now we have the numbers.
They're just confirming it with statistics that can be shown to other parties. Yeah. Okay. Other question, Anton, we can take.
We love the fact of what we're hearing regarding money, but a question would be is, when will the Black community begin to actually see these resources? How soon will it actually be materialized to the community?
As soon as possible. As soon as the budget is passed by Parliament. We can't spend money that hasn't been approved by Parliament. So Parliament has to vote on the budget. The first vote was today. There's another one, I think, in the next couple of days. Hopefully the budget will pass. It's not just up to us. We need the support of the opposition, at least one of the parties to support us. But as soon as the budget passes, there's a second process that I have to go through, which is the Treasury Board process. I have to get Treasury Board authorization, and I will go to get that as soon as possible. As soon as I get that, we can spend the money. So that's that. In terms of, but I do want to address one thing. Sometimes it's important to sacrifice speed and instead do things the right way. Let me give you an example. The Supporting Black Canadians Communities Initiative. I decided to go through an intermediary model so that we gave the money to 3 Black Canadian intermediary organizations, large ones, to then disperse the money to the smaller groups. Now, I had a choice to do things the same old, which is to just have everyone apply to the government. That would have been easier for me. But I wanted to build capacity for the larger organizations while we disperse the money for the smaller organizations. And I'm glad I did that. The problem is it took a little bit longer. And I also got a little bit of pushback from some segments of the community saying, we need speed. Yes, but we also need to build capacity for the intermediaries. And I'm glad I did that, because today, the 3 intermediaries, and hopefully we'll get a 4th one in Western Canada, we have 3, potentially 4 large Black Canadian organizations that now have the capacity to manage government money. So next time they'll be in a better position to do even more. But doing the right thing sometimes takes a little bit more time, and sometimes people get impatient, and so we have to tell them, look, we can do things the easy way, or we can do things the right way.
And again, Minister, that is one of the stuff I'm certain we're doing in the BPP, and I know Operation Vote is doing the same thing. We are creating the capacity to convince those parties who want to support us that we can handle big money.
And by the way, speaking of BBPA, again, the difficulty is I'm busy enough with my portfolio, but one of the ideas that I just thought of is, because we're providing more money, namely $87 million more to encourage procurement for racialized communities, including Black Canadian entrepreneurs, to access government contracts and procurement. It's not my ministry, that's Public Services and Procurement Canada. I would urge BBPA to approach Minister Anand and say, look, we know that there's more money in the budget. Could we work with you to become an intermediary so that BBPA guides those Black Canadian entrepreneurs to access that procurement? But in the process, BBPA also will increase its capacity. That's what I would like to see happen. And I'm giving that suggestion to you, Nadine.
Thank you, Minister. And
I'm happy to help in that process. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Any other question, Anton?
Yes. Many well-known Black-led organizations were recently rejected, saying they were not Black enough. How can your government ensure that this does not happen going forward?
First of all, that's not what it was about. It was misreported by the media. We never said that no one was not Black enough, and I'm responsible for that fund. What happened was the folks who sent that communication were motivated with the best of intentions, but the communication was wrong. And the reason for that was because we wanted to make sure that those funds that were dedicated for Black Canadian organizations did not go to non-Black Canadian organizations. And there was a danger of that happening because some non-Black Canadian organizations applied to that fund for Black Canadian community organizations. So in an attempt to make sure and ensure that it only went to Black Canadian community organizations, the bureaucrats communicated in the wrong manner and said that you've been denied funding for those that they felt didn't check a box. I immediately corrected, and that was done without my knowledge because that communications didn't go through my office. It was done at a lower level in the bureaucracy. You know what happened next? I publicly called the department out and I said, we have to do better. The letter was unacceptable. We revoked the letter and we sent an apology. And I immediately changed the communications protocol in my department to make sure that I personally approve any future communications to the organization so that we get it right. And my team is on it as well. The second thing we've done is we've completely overhauled the application guide and the application form so that that mistake doesn't happen again. Third, I'm going to be naming an external group of advisors composed of experts, leaders in the Black Canadian community to advise us on making sure that moving forward, that we get it right. And finally, now that we have $100 million, I can assure you that virtually, not all, but virtually almost all of the folks who applied, who had eligible projects, will be funded this time because now we have way more money for this year, which is 100 million. We basically went from, in that round, from between 3 to 10 million to 100 million. So we have $100 million now to invest in Black Canadian community organizations, both in capacity and in capital projects.
Thanks, Minister. Just remind me, Minister, is the definition for Black-owned or Black-led?
No, it's two. It's Black-led and Black-serving.
And Black-serving. Oh, Black-led and Black-serving. Okay. Yeah. So is the definition for Black-led still 50% or more of the directors, so and so should be black.
Yes, but this time moving forward, we will just go. I mean, we will just ask folks to just indicate yes on the application form, and that's good enough. We won't follow up or do anything more than that. Yeah, we trust the community, and that's good enough.
Okay, beautiful. All right. Other question, Anton?
Yes, I do. Some of the infrastructure and capital grants require organizations to own their buildings. However, a number of organizations serve the new immigrants and people of color rent spaces, for example, from Toronto Housing.
Yes.
How will they be able to access those funds for improvements?
That's a very, very good question. And, mostly I have an answer to virtually all the questions. This one is a little harder because there is an interplay between, for example, an organization that is renting space from TCHC. TCHC may not be authorizing them to do those renovations, or there may be something in the rules on government money going to renovate a space that you don't own. So there is some issues there, and I will have to get back to get to the bottom of that and kind of figure it out myself, whether we can still proceed with that or whether we need to make some changes in our authorized ways of spending money to fix that. But that's one where I don't actually have an answer now, but I will certainly figure it out as we unveil the next stage of the SBCCI fund.
Incidentally, Minister, does the rule allow us to garnish funds to purchase property?
No,
rather than to rent?
as it stands now, no, there is no acquisition fund. But there is under the Rapid Housing Initiative, just to change the topic slightly, under the Rapid Housing Initiative, you are eligible for 100% funding to buy a building or to buy land or both and build affordable housing. And the reason there's a connection here is a portion, less than 10%, can be used as an office and space for the community, right? So in other words, you can have a 30-story building, but if the first floor is used for a community center, an office, and a daycare, that's fine. And we will pay 100%. So look out for the new Rapid Housing Initiative. Last round, we did fund a lot of Black Canadian projects. This round, we have even more money, 1.5 billion. Last time it was 1 billion, but that's even misleading because we chopped it in the middle, and 500 million went to the top 15 cities in Canada with the highest number of homeless individuals. So for the project stream, for individual organizations, they were competing for $500 million only. Now we have 1.5 billion, which is 3 times what we had last time in terms of the projects. And I intend to send all of that money to projects. So this is a huge opportunity for Black Canadian organizations to leverage that program. It's a massive amount of money, and it's 100% federal contribution. It's not a loan, it's a grant, 100% federal, land, building acquisition, and everything.
And I think it's something we will certainly explore, because if we were to do the stats on a black rental property, most of the organizations are working through rental property. Albeit the rent may not be high, but if you were to do all the rents we pay throughout all the different sections, it's a sizable sum of money. And our organization is legacy. We're here for hundreds of years.
And then there's a separate fund to acquire commercial properties and convert them into residential. So there's an additional $300 million that has been provided in this budget, but that's a loan program. So you'll borrow money, acquire the property, and turn it into a mixture of affordable and full market housing, which then pays for itself. So there's that, and then there's the Rapid Housing Initiative, which is completely a grant, 1.5 billion.
At the back end, I'll ask you a question about voluntarism and tax receipts and so on. Because one of the things you'll find, Mr. Minister, is that the charitable organization is not allowed to do a lot of what you have just described. because by doing that, we lose our charitable status.
No, you can under the National Housing Strategy. You are able to do that. We do allow,
and it fits within the non-profit environment.
Yes. In fact, for the National Housing Co-Investment Fund and the Rapid Housing Initiative, they're all non-profit. We do for-profit with another program, but
okay, beautiful,
yeah,
perfect.
So
thanks,
look into,
thanks
and as I said, you don't have to worry because it's 100% federal contribution. So you don't have to bring any dollar to the table. We pay for the entire project, including the land.
Okay, thanks. We shall proceed with that one.
Minister,
Yes,
do you have any closing remarks before Francis says a few words?
I'm told I have a few more minutes, and there's so many questions. I feel bad letting people, leaving people on the hook. So Anton seems to be asking me some tough questions, so I should stick around for a little bit more.
Perfect. Go on, Anton.
What's the time? We can go to, is it 9 o'clock?
No, I can't say till 9, no.
So we can go until 8 o'clock, eh?
Yeah, sure.
Another 15 minutes, okay.
Just so this one time, normally.
Yeah, thank you very much, Minister, thank you very much. So we call pivoting.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Minister. So here's another question. In the current budget, how are there increased monies for the Black Entrepreneur Program ecosystem to support training for Black entrepreneurs? When will funding through the BEP ecosystem be available?
So for the Black Entrepreneurship Program, it's $51 million in additional money. So there was already a total amount between the Government of Canada and the private sector. It was 221 million. This is an additional amount of 51 million over 4 years.
Okay.
When it will flow, I'm not sure. It's up to Minister Mary Ng, who's been working very closely with the community. Maybe Nadine has more insight there. I haven't been updated on that.
Okay.
I want to say something that Michael has reminded me of. This is something that Black Canadian community is uniquely positioned to use. Many faith organizations in our community are real estate rich but cash poor, meaning they have land. You'll go to a church and then you'll see a huge parking lot at the back. That land can be leveraged to unlock federal dollars under the National Housing Strategy, through the Co-Investment Fund, through the Rapid Housing Initiative, and many other programs. And so that once you bring that land, it unlocks a huge amount of money in the National Housing Strategy. And I know that many of those churches and mosques would like to build affordable housing, but they don't know where to begin. And they don't realize that they're sitting on land that could be leveraged to unlock federal dollars for housing. And it's okay if you're not an expert in housing. Under the National Housing Co-Investment Fund, we have seed money. We will actually sit with you and give you money to polish your project proposal, to put a viable proposal together and hire accountants and consultants and so on. So we're helping you with seed money so that you can help yourself. So it's an incredible opportunity, and I don't understand why we're not using that program as much as we could. And as the minister who's responsible for housing, I have a vested interest to make sure that the National Housing Strategy also works for Black Canadians. And we need to encourage more proponents to come forward so that we can build more affordable housing for Black Canadians, because I know how much the need is.
Thank you, Minister. We will certainly proceed on that ground. You'll be hearing definitely from our constituency, because we have a similar program that we call BAIDS, which is to enhance our capacity to do better. Okay. Bring on board the accountants and the real estate people to help us to make those proposals that will lead to higher success. So definitely you'll be hearing from us.
Anton.
No worries. So, well, I thank you for that, Minister. Here's another question from someone from Lawrence Heights. In Lawrence Heights, we are going through a revitalization. And in 2017, the National Housing was announced, question is, how can residents tap in to ensure they start becoming, they start to own homes?
Oh, okay. That's actually a really good question. One of the things that Statistics Canada uncovered is that Black Canadians are the only group that is lagging behind everyone else except Indigenous peoples when it comes to home ownership. So I've been trying different things to really address that as the minister in charge of the National Housing Strategy and the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. So one of the things that I did towards the end of last year is I tried a pilot program to invest, a one-time program to invest $40 million to provide home ownership to 200 Black Canadian families. And it worked. So we should try more of those kinds of things. The second thing is to re-examine the rules around mortgages and home ownership to facilitate and have a different view to eliminate barriers for home ownership for Black Canadians. Look at the way we measure credit when people go to seek mortgages. They'll ask you for assets, but we have, for example, people everywhere in every community, but let me take the example of a Black Canadian individual who's been in Canada, say for 20 years as an immigrant, who's now a Canadian, who doesn't have assets, but has been having a job and has been paying rent uninterrupted for 20 years or 30 years. Why should that not count for something? That should count as points towards your suitability for trust with respect to mortgage access. So those are the kinds of rules that I'm looking at, and I'm trying to influence CMHC to have that anti-racism strategy to really eliminate those barriers to home ownership for Black Canadians. And we had our first major meeting last week before the budget with the CEO of CMHC and a number of a select group of Black Canadian folks who are interested in leading the way in terms of building and accessing home ownership. And I'm going to continue those efforts. So we're going to have more. And I'm thinking about a number of other possible solutions. And if you have ideas, please let me know.
In fact, Mr. Minister, you'll find that people tend to pay higher rent than they would pay
absolutely.
for mortgage. And they've been doing it for 20 years.
Yeah.
You know, so it's a win-win.
Yes.
Anton.
Well, you know what? We have one more question. I have someone that's actually wanting to ask you a direct question.
Go ahead.
Michelle Walters.
You're gonna unmute her?
Yeah, Rakisha, go ahead, unmute yourself. Unmute your mic, please.
Great. Hello, Minister. Thank you for taking the time today.
No problem.
So in your opening statements, you made mention of the federal government's new crime bill. And we know that Black people make up 7.2% of the federal inmate population, but only 3% of population.
Yeah.
We also know that in the wake of this bill, numerous experts, including criminal defense lawyers and Senators Kim Pate, have noted that the government's crime reform bill, Bill C-22, it largely tinkers around the edges rather than making true transformational changes in our criminal legal system. Specifically, my question is, why didn't the government repeal all mandatory minimum sentences that have been found unconstitutional in Canadian courts? And why didn't the government erase criminal records for simple marijuana possession? We also know that Bill C-22 leaves 52 offenses with mandatory minimums in place, and that's not even a third of the total minimum offenses that have been scrapped. So, I mean, in my view, I'm waiting for the government to truly get it right and repeal all mandatory minimum sentences.
So I disagree with your position respectfully. Starting with the name of the bill, it's not the crime bill; it is criminal justice reform bill, and that's precisely what we're trying to do. On mandatory minimums, did we get all the way where I would have liked, in addition to the community? Absolutely not, and I'll be the first to admit that. But have we made significant progress? Of course, and eliminating a number of those mandatory minimum penalties that have led to an over-incarceration of particularly two groups, Indigenous and Black Canadians. I think, I disagree with you respectfully when you talk about tinkering around the edges. Bringing back conditional sentence orders is not tinkering around the edges, in my opinion. Providing a substantial amount of money, north of $700 million to invest in community justice centers is not tinkering around the edges. Introducing and funding in a comprehensive way reforms towards sentencing so that judges offenders will have an opportunity, similar to Gladue reports, to have racism and cultural impact assessments for sentencing is huge. That hasn't happened in the past. Making sure that we don't just fund the traditional elements of the criminal justice system, but that we go downstream and upstream and fund the organizations that are doing an amazing work to divert people away from the criminal justice system, but also those who are rehabilitating and reintegrating people. That's huge. Making sure that we completely even prevent a class of people to even touch the criminal justice system and divert them towards treatment and counseling and supports. These are folks with addictions. These are folks with mental health challenges. Move them away from the criminal justice system. So Bill C-22 is not set in stone. There's broad parameters in terms of what we're trying to do, which is quite comprehensive. I will agree with you on one point. I believe there's more work to be done on mandatory minimum sentences, but even there, we got rid of a number of those. Could we have done more? I believe we could and we should sooner rather than later. But in terms of all the other pieces of the criminal justice reforms, too many to actually list here. I would respectfully say that it's quite comprehensive, it's quite significant. It reflects not all, but a lot of what the community was asking for. And I commit to you that there is more work to be done, and I will continue to champion the remaining pieces to make sure that we address the anti-Black racism and the anti-Indigenous racism that is embedded in our criminal justice system.
Okay, so thanks for that. We can't proceed. We have to take a continuation of this discussion another time. It's now 5 to the hour, and the minister have already extended this courtesy. So it's a good question, but we'll have to pick up on this one another time.
Anton is not going to let me go that easily. So one more.
One last question. It's not a question. It's actually a statement.
Okay, go ahead.
I think it's a profound one. We are pleased to see the level of commitment in the budget to the Black business community, especially as we look to build the post-COVID economy. That was from Jason. So I wholeheartedly agree with that one. And that is now the final question I'll have for you tonight.
All right. So the final question is really my peep. It's not really a question. It's one of my peep project I want to get across. It's probably not directly in your portfolio, Honorable Minister, but you can pass it on to the relevant party. We spend a lot of time in the Black community doing volunteer work. We have always been doing it.
Yes.
And in the past, way back many years when they came up with the tax receipts for charitable stuff, it was only based on donation in kind. You give some books, you give some used clothes, you give some toys, etc. When it comes to professionals providing their time, their skill set, or their effort, there's no such thing as a tax receipt for that. I, for example, do a lot of pro bono audits for charities. There is a mechanism to what they call swap checks. You know, I give you an invoice, you pay me, I use that money to make a donation. But I think a simple technical change in the language that will allow services to be given tax receipt can make a fundamental impact in our community, because we can get more lawyers and more dentists and more accountants and real estate people to provide their skill sets, and we can provide them with a tax receipt. So I'm going to ask you, Honorable Minister, if you could pass that along. And some folks might not think it's impactful, but I'm telling you, I give between 300 and 500 hours every year.
Wow.
In devoting my time to do pro bono audit. And I know there's a lot of other folks that do a lot of other stuff, but it's service and it doesn't consider for tax receipts. So, and again, on behalf of who is here, I'd like to say thanks. I'm not the official cheerleader here, but I just like to say my own 2 cents. It is amazing, Honorable Minister, not just the budget itself, but the fact that you have made the time. This is my 2nd webinar, and it's good, and it takes us where we want to be, where the people understand the budget and understand how it impacts their life. So thanks for coming on, and I think it's go back to Velma, or is it our ED? It's the ED, okay. So we're gonna ask our ED to move the voter thanks.
Honorable Minister Hussen, kindly accept our sincere thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us this evening. We are elated that this historic budget ensures the Black community was factored into the decision-making process.
Yes.
That you would, through our meetings, and I say our, because I know the BBPA, Group Transet, BIA, Black Vote Canada, were aggressive in our approach and our roundtables, our appeals. It softens my heart to know that those meetings were not in vain.
Oh yeah.
We are at this juncture, that you would deliver a budget that at this juncture addresses an endowment that will surpass your government, but will have positive impact on our Black community is commendable. We're relieved in light of the last few days and television about George Floyd, that you have made efforts to address racism. We hope soon to be more focused on anti-Black racism. But we hope that moving forward, we can, there will be the impact on criminal justice, or on policing, on education, on healthcare, on home ownership. We are glad that all those have been structured, but we know that these are that's what has inhibited our ability to move forward and limited our capacities. So we were looking forward to you and this budget really making an impact and changing the lives of our Black community. I'm glad that you mentioned Minister Annan as a procurement professional. I will take that lead to make sure that the BBPA becomes an intermediary, because I know as a procurement professional how difficult it is for Black persons to get into procurement, especially government procurement. We love the housing initiative, and I know that my treasurer was taking notes, because we will be coming to you and looking to you for advice on moving that forward. So we thank you for this budget and for approaching it with Black Canadian lens. It tells us that your vision for us is strong, your vision for us is inclusive, and that we will be part of that recovery of the Canadian economy. I think that makes us feel included and appreciated. And just as we appreciate your time tonight, we appreciate the fact that you factored us into that decision. So we look forward to working with you, and there will be phone calls from the BBPA to you. So we hope you have more time for us. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister.
Thank you, Nadine and Velma. Do I go ahead with my concluding remarks now? Or okay. Thank you so much. This was really an amazing opportunity to once again connect, update each other on the budget, and hear from you directly what more needs to be done. But make no mistake, this was a budget, and thanks to the Parliamentary Black Caucus, Greg Fergus, Marcy Ian, and many, many others, Emmanuel Dubois, and myself, we really pushed hard. $100 million going to, I'm going to talk specifically about the dedicated monies. There's other monies that also impact Black Canadians, but let me start off with $100 million just for this year, 2021-2022, the fiscal year, for the Supporting Black Canadians Communities Initiative. Think of the dozens of organizations that we will be able to fund now with capital and with capacity building projects. $200 million in an endowment fund. Think of the legacy, the sustained proceeds that will come from that fund, that will last generations, that will fund so many nonprofits and charitable organizations in the Black Canadian community. additional money, $51 million additional on top of the $221 million for the Black Entrepreneurship Program. $87 million for Public Services and Procurement Canada to, among other things, set up a program to do Black procurement, Black Canadian procurement. Now that 87 is not just for Black Canadians, but Black Canadians should get their fair share of that. And I'm suggesting BBPA could at least offer to be an intermediary, because procurement, we know, is not easy. $172 million is going to Statistics Canada so that they can engage in putting together disaggregated data by race so that we can address the gaps. When you see the gaps, you can address them. But if you don't measure it, you don't track it, you can't fix it. $400 million to set up a community service recovery fund. Out of that $400 million, I expect Black Canadians to get their equitable and fair share, because we know that nonprofits and charitable organizations in the Black Canadian community are going above and beyond to help members of the community, members of all communities. And so they should get some of that money. $50 million is earmarked for the Investment Readiness Program. That program, I have said over and over again, should include more equity-seeking groups. So I hope that you can spread the message to alert Black social enterprises to access that $50 million in the Investment Readiness Program. $220 million as part of the first 2 years of the Social Finance Fund. Again, if you know social enterprises in the Black Canadian community, tell them to apply. Tell them to be on standby, use the Investment Readiness Program, and then get ready for the Social Finance Fund. $75 million over 5 years going to tackle systemic racism in the RCMP. $88 million over 5 years to fund community organizations, to facilitate people to get pardons. This includes funding for community organizations. $5.7 billion for youth. I know that Black youth will benefit from that. This will help them to pursue their education, continue their education. We're doubling the Canada Student Grant. We're creating 215,000 jobs for youth. We're enabling them to increase their skills and be ready for the jobs of tomorrow. The budget also offers new and substantial sums of money, $3 billion for old age security for seniors, public transit, and so on. There is, of course, for Black entrepreneurs, they can continue to access the extended Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. People will be able to continue to access the extended Canada Recovery Benefit, the extended EI, Canada Emergency Business Account, flexible and reasonable sickness benefit. $140 million additional dollars for food security and community food programs. The Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy for all small businesses that qualify, including Black businesses. I already talked about the housing, Rapid Housing Initiative, Co-Investment Fund. Please, please, please make sure that you take advantage of these programs. Last but not least, I want to highlight two final things. Number one, you're all leaders in the community. Please, please, please tell people every year, my ministry in particular and other ministries, we get back hundreds of millions of dollars every year that shouldn't be coming back to us. I think the number is like over 900 million, 924 million. Those are benefits that should be going to people who need it and who are qualified, but they don't apply for those benefits. So please tell people to file their income taxes. If you don't file your income taxes, there's a lot of benefits that flow through the income tax system. You don't get it. Like, for example, the Canada Child Benefit, the GST tax credit, and many others. If you don't file for those benefits, you don't get those benefits. So please encourage as many people as possible in the community to file their income taxes. Second, as much as we are interacting like this and making sure that programs that I'm responsible for work for the community, I urge you to reach out to other ministers as well. Make sure that they know your priorities. Make sure that you're there when it comes to procurement. Make sure that when there's funding for artists, that Black Canadian artists also get their fair share. make sure that you're using the National Housing Strategy. The National Housing Strategy, when we announced it in 2017, was $40 billion. Now it's more than $70 billion. Black Canadians should leverage that money to build affordable housing in partnership with faith communities, in partnership with Black Canadian developers, and in partnership with nonprofits. And I can help in that process, and I'm more than happy to, and nothing would make me happier. The same goes for the Social Finance Fund. The same goes for many other programs. So we'll continue this dialogue. Obviously, you know that we can't cover all these issues even in a 2-hour meeting, but make no mistake, this budget really is investing in communities and is investing in individuals. It's about really having the backs of Canadians. Early learning and childcare, how could I forget? $30 billion over the next 5 years to bring fees down by 50% by the end of next year, and bring fees down to $10 a day by the end of 5 years. I want to make sure that Black Canadian children see themselves in the new Canada-wide system that we will build for early learning and childcare. That's why when I talk about it, I always talk about how we're going to build an affordable system that delivers high quality childcare, but childcare that is inclusive and accessible. So inclusive for racialized kids, inclusive for Black Canadian kids, accessible to kids with disabilities. So Black Canadian providers of childcare and early childhood education will be receiving significant federal support. And after the 5 years, we will be investing $9.2 billion every single year, permanently. So we want to make sure that early childhood educators are supported, that they're better trained, that we increase their salaries, that we recruit more of them, that we increase the respect that the society has for them. And we know many of those early childhood educators are women, and they're Black women. So we need to be aware of that. And the government is going big on early learning and childcare. So as we conclude those agreements with provinces and territories, remember that the federal government's portion is 30 billion over 5 years and 9.2 billion every year. Make sure that Black Canadian service providers for early learning and childcare are able to, again, access those capital dollars, those infrastructure dollars that we will be spending. And so I want to leave you with a sense that there's a lot we can do together if we continue to talk to each other and engage each other. And I'm always available and accessible, as you know. People kept saying, you know, thank you so much, Minister, for being here. I'm home. You don't need to thank me. I'm among friends and family. So thank you for giving me your time always. Merci beaucoup, tout le monde.
Thank you. And I know the minister's staff is going to be sending out a list of everything that he talked about. So please help us once you get the list to distribute it to organizations or people who can't come onto these calls, because we do want our community to take advantage of all of these different resources and supports that are out there.
Jordan, I think you want to take a picture, or?
Yes.
Yeah, just before we leave. Yeah.
So if people want to put their cameras on or not, but we're taking a picture.
So everyone, everyone can put their cameras on. Put their cameras on so we can do. Here we go. There we go. I see it coming on now.
So I'll take it on 3. 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for coming. Thanks, guys. I've jumped to another Zoom session.
Thank you.
Thank you for organizing this. It was wonderful.
You're welcome.
Good. Very good.
Yes, thank you.